How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the podcast. Um, Today, I'm recording a podcast on 10 problems with agave in Mexico and how California will more than likely make the same mistakes. So, I wanted to make this video or this podcast because I was talking with one of my friends about this the other day, and he's a California agave farmer like me. And we were just talking about how we're seeing a lot of the California agave industry copy a lot of the bad from Mexico, um, and they're not realizing a lot of the issues that they're now copying, right? So, for instance, um, there's a lot of issues with agave in Mexico that maybe California is now wanting to implement here, but they're not looking at the repercussions of those implementations, right? Um, so I can give you um, 10 examples today that I think um, California, Mexico, the world can improve on. And this isn't a, you know, whole country case, obviously, but the majority of um, Mexican agave probably fits into one of these 10 issues. And as new California or agave farmers um, outside of Mexico, we should be looking towards the very small, innovative, traditional, ecologically sound farms in Mexico, not to copy, but to seek inspiration from and, apply their methods in various, uh, new ways in whichever country or region you're in around the world, right? So if there's issues in agave in any country, today I'll be talking about Mexico and California, but in any country, you should seek to avoid those as a new agave farmer in whatever country you're in, right? So the big issue um, with a lot of agave farming in Mexico that people talk about, and which will be our number one issue, is agave monoculture. So California, or I mean Mexico, mainly grows two types of agave that account for the majority uh, of agave grown, and, and that is agave tequiliana and agave espadin, which are two subspecies of agave angustifolia. Actually, they're cousins of, you know, or brother and sister, you could say, of the same mother. So the majority of agave grown in Mexico are these two types. There are dozens of other types that are grown that account for, I mean, put it this way, like the agave tequiliana is probably, I would estimate, 70 to 85% of agave production, and espadín is maybe 10 or 15%. Mezcal is definitely boomed, and it's definitely a large industry. It's probably like 700 million now, but tequila's multi-billions of dollars, and mezcal is just a blip on the radar for tequila when you really look at it in perspective on the numbers side, right? Like, sure, it's like I mentioned, booming, and a lot of people are talking about it, but the numbers don't lie. Mezcal really ain't shit compared to tequila. And then when you look in mezcal and you start looking at, oh, let's look at Potatorum, the Tobola, let's look at, Tepestate, the Marmorada, let's look at, you know, these different agaves like Lamparillo, which is agave asperima. These different agaves account for probably less than 5%. That might be even fucking generous. they might be less than 1% of agave that is going into spirit production, right? And because the large majority of agave in Mexico is going into spirit production, and there's regional denominations, then that means that, they're kind of limited to these two species if they want to grow agave quickly to produce a spirit quickly and make some profit, right? Because a lot of these other agave species are obviously going to take them much more longer than 5 to 7 years, which is what Espadin and Tequiliana is taking. I mean, I've seen some fucking Tequiliana and Espadin from Hijuelo to bloom go out in 3.5 years and have high bricks. And this is something actually I was talking about with a few people separately, but I'm I would love to do some research on this because a lot of the farms I'm seeing bring up agave very quickly within 3 to 4 years are new farms that prior to growing agave grew, for instance, corn and beans and squash, the three sisters. Most of the time it's just corn, but a lot of the times it's the three sisters. And it's interesting to me because when you have beans growing in an area, you have a lot of nitrogen fixation coming from that bean crop. So I believe these agave are just growing very quickly because maybe there's a extreme amount of nitrogen availability in that soil directly after it's been harvested of those crops, and then now they plant agave. That's a theory of mine. I have no evidence for that besides just, trying to correlate it based on talking to people, but something definitely that probably should be researched because that's fucking very fast. But as we've been talking about in an earlier podcast, who cares if this shit comes out in 3, 4 years if it has very simple sugars? Even if it has a lot of sugars, it's a very limited flavor profile that you can make with Espadin or Tequiliana, right? I mean, if you ask people what is your favorite mezcal, I don't think anybody that is into mezcal will tell you Espadin. It's like the most basic, I don't want to just hate on agave to hate on it, but it really is one of the most basic flavor profiles of agave in the world. That's why I don't really grow many of them because I've mainly grown, agave for spirit production, you could say for hobby, for me, and for the enjoyment. So why the fuck am I going to grow something I don't like that? So getting back to the point here, monocultures are just a bad thing, right? If you have a whole field of agave tequiliana, it can lead, and you get one plague on a plant, it could spread through the whole field like wildfire. Say your fucking farm is healthy, and you got a humidor that went to another farm who didn't clean his tools, and a lot of agave people aren't testing their agave all the time, and then say this agave had fungus on it, and he's spreading it over to your farm now because, they didn't do proper biocontrols on his tools, which I do, and I've explained on another podcast on when I cut trees in Los Angeles because I don't want to spread diseases unintentionally. So there's a lot of ways that disease can spread through monoculture systems, and tequila in the past has had several instances where the industry has almost been wiped out completely. Um, here in America, I've seen cochineal and mealybug and white fly on agave, and several of these are due to high humidity, overwatering, and not knowing how to take care of your agave. But the point is, when they have a monoculture, say of agave, um, in this one case, Istamensis. So the agave Istamensis cultivar cream spike. If one, I knew a nursery that got cochineal on one of them, and their whole nursery of this shit got destroyed here in California. They don't even grow it anymore. It's that bad. You get me? So why I tell you this? Well, monocultures are just a shitty system. You know what I mean? You don't want a monoculture of agave. And in California, we should be trying to copy the diverse agave farmers that are growing with trees, growing with cactus, growing with different crops. You know, lots of people grow them with avocados, lots of people grow them with citrus, lots of people grow them with, I'm growing them with fruiting palms, with fruiting trees like mulberries, right? So it's like the agave, if you want to have a ecologically sound farm, cannot just be a fucking monoculture, okay? This is this is horrible. And when I mention monoculture, I also don't want in a monoculture of agave. Even if you have 20 different agave species, if you just have agave, that's pretty much a monoculture as well. It's a monoculture of agave. You know what I mean? So it's like you want to also have a polyculture of plants, not just agave. You get me? I give you an example. Here I plant cactus with my agave. Why? When the gophers come, the ground squirrels come, when the jackrabbits come, if they happen to beat my dogs, which is unlikely, but sometimes they do, and they're hidden at night and they come in sneaky sneaky. All right, they're gonna go for the cactus first. I plant them right next to the agave. When I lose a cactus, I know to be watchful already, right? So then it doesn't get to the agave. I'll go plant another cactus, right? Because cactus grows quickly. If I heavily irrigate it, it'll grow super, super quickly. It gives me tons of pads, and each pad could become a new cactus. So just like the huevos. But the point there is that use trap plants, use nitrogen fixating trees here, like my Palo Verdes and my mesquites. You know what I mean? Use trees that will benefit the agave and whatever other crops you're growing. Don't just do a monoculture. I don't know how many times to fucking repeat it. Don't just do a monoculture. It will lead to lots of issues for you. I was explaining in the last podcast about how a monoculture of agave tequiliana in Espadín in California that is being planted. So we're copying the bat of Mexico there. We're just planting two species mainly. And sure, there's a lot of innovative small farmers like me, but the majority of California agave planted today, like, by big ag, say there's 1,000 acres by big ag, and then there's like 100 acres of small little guys like me, you know what I mean? Well, the big guys are just planting a agave espadín and tequiliana, and we're planting a bunch of really diverse shit, but does it really matter if we're planting a bunch of really diverse shit if we don't have the numbers? You get me? Because at the end of the day, the majority of California agave will just be those two species, just like Mexico is, which is an issue because of many problems. But here, let me just highlight two real quick. If everybody's growing a commodity agave, do you think you're going to get a good price for it? There's going to be huge price fluctuations and price swings because it's a fucking commodity. So if everybody's growing Espadín and Tequiliana and you're growing some unique Utahensis or Havargiana or, Montana or whatever the fuck, then you're going to be able to demand a good price that is sustainable for your farm because it's not a commodity. It's now something niche. You get me? Um, and at the same time, a lot of the monoculture, like for instance, the agave tequiliana and espadín, heavy, planted in big farms, they only have a limited availability of what they could do with that agave. You get me? So each agave is going to be better for a biofuel, for a fiber, for energy production, for biomedical research. Like I give you an example, agave vilmoreana, agave jabali, they're two of the ones I've identified as the most saponin rich agaves. Those, let's put them towards biomedical research, right? Because I believe saponins have a huge potential to be a medicine, you know what I mean, and work on cancer and work on anti-inflammatory and working with diabetics and all this shit. Or maybe put it towards inulin. You know what I mean? There's going to be agaves better for inulin. One agave I know that people are growing in a certain region a lot for specifically inulin is a agave hybrid between Salmiana and Americana. I have one here in California that an American hybridized called Mr. Ripple, which is a fucking monster. And the ones that they're growing out there in Mexico, they don't have a cool nickname like that. I don't know what they call it. I just have heard on the Agave Cultura podcast about an episode about how they were doing that. And I was like, that's pretty cool because they're focusing on just the inulin. So then there's going to be better ones for biofuels. You know, you want some fucking 12-footer Mapisagas that might have a ginormous Pinot or Americanas, you know, but probably better for biofuel and energy production. You want some fast growing for spirits that are basic commodities? Yeah, maybe you want some agave tequiliana and espadín. Um, you know, to show everybody, like say even if you were a niche market or a niche agave spirit producer and you're producing some utensils or some really unique shit, well, if everybody's drinking tequila and espadín, maybe you don't want that to be your focus because you're not gonna make as much money, but you make a few bottles of that shit because it'll come out quick and maybe you don't make as much profit, but that's how you introduce the general market into your niche spirits, right? Because you're making those in your style, right? So they're going to be a little bit different than the Espadín and Tequiliana of other people. So you got to play with it. You got to play with it. You know, monoculture, it just sucks. I don't give a fuck. You know, I've heard many arguments on efficiency and all of this BS for why monoculture works, but I I don't really agree with any of it. I mean, even if it is more efficient on one thing, it's only on a temporary basis because you're not accounting for environmental externalities and, you know, a lot of that shit. So, uh, you know, efficient for who? Efficient for humans, not the planet. I mean, like, to give you an example of an article I was reading today about a big grower here in the Central Valley. I won't name them because I don't want to get sued, but they grow a huge vegetable, a huge amount of this one vegetable. They're taking all the groundwater, right? And my point is, they're growing a monoculture of just fucking one vegetable and destroying the groundwater for the whole little area right there. And, you know, you don't want to ever have a monoculture system like this one company that I'm thinking of preaches organic and how they're amazing carrots and the tasting and all that, right? And it's like, yeah, but your system is unsustainable. It's not, you know, it's not gonna last past another generation. And if we regulate it even sooner, it's gonna go to shit. So, um, monoculture systems like really only work when you're not accounting for the water environmental externalities that um, you know, uh, yeah, you're just not accounting for them. I mean, there's all types of costs that are associated with the destruction of the environment, right? Like I always love that example. It's like nobody gave a fuck about the bees until some, you know, environmental uh, scientists and did the externalities on it and realized that if you had to hand pollinate everything, it would cost like trillions of dollars. And then they were like, well, we don't have the fucking money or the manpower to do that. We better start saving the bees or we're going to lose all of agriculture. It's like, look, environmentalists, one thing they need to understand is that there's a different way to approach people that don't give a fuck about the environment, and that is through money. And once they told people that we're going to lose a bunch of money if we don't save the bees, people started paying attention, man, on these business angles. You get me? Especially the big farmers, because I mean, I know a farm that pays over $3 million a year in fucking pollination costs. You know what I mean? Like they're definitely trying to save the bees by planting tons of ground covers and trying to attract them. And you get me? Like there's huge costs behind a lot of these environmental externalities, and that's why these big agave farms in Mexico and big vegetable farms here in the Central Valley are able to get away with things because the environment in the water and the human a lot of the times they're not being accounted for at fair price. So I don't want to stay on this one too long. You know, if you want to talk to me more about monoculture, I mean, this shit could take its own whole podcast. But let's get to our second point, which is going to be the destruction of the environment. And in this particular case, we're going to talk about how the boom of mezcal and tequila has led to a large portion of ecological destruction in Jalisco, right? And Oaxaca. Just it's done that everywhere, but let's just focus on these two areas, and you know it will be kind of applied to everywhere once you learn. So when I go to Mexico, I was talking with this on another podcast with my homie El Tequilero 90, and I was telling him, you know, it's beautiful when I was growing up to see a hillside of blue agave where like my family's agave fields all blue. Agave tequiliana, which I need to talk to my cousin about that. But so I would be amazed. I would be like, this is so cool. It's like full of agave. I knew it went into spirits and pulque. I'm like, dope. Well, then I started, studying environment and realizing what the hell that meant. And now I realize a couple things. So let me give you some background. Jalisco and Oaxaca are two of the most heavily forested states in Mexico. If I remember correctly, more than half to two-thirds of each state is covered in forest or was covered in forest at one point. And now they're severely, you know, taking out a lot of the environment. They're cutting down hillsides, they're cutting down canyons, they're cutting down all this beautiful nature to just grow a monoculture of espadín in Oaxaca and a tequiliana in Jalisco, right? So before everybody, it was like Napa, before all the hippies showed up, it was like plant whatever the fuck you want, whenever the fuck you want. Nobody's gonna stop you, right? So this went on for decades unchecked, and now you're starting to see some pushback in Jalisco. You're starting to see a lot of environmentalists and study folk hate agave because they're like, we're losing our groundwater resources now that the climate isn't steady and they're pulling groundwater and not dry farming it anymore. We're losing our trees and our air is being more polluted. Our groundwater is being more polluted. Our, soils are being polluted because they're throwing the vinazas back that are heavily sometimes still carry a lot of the pesticides and a lot of the chemicals. And, you know, I agree with them here. The growth of tequila shouldn't mean the destruction of the environment. And you know me, as a geneticist, this shit pisses me off the most because, I'll give you an example. The agave I love the most, agave Vilmoriana, sure if you talk to me, I mean, I mention this fucker a lot. It's from Jalisco. Grows on rocky hillsides. And now they're clearing places where this shit grows to grow tequiliana. And this is not the only agave under threat, right? So they're losing a lot of their genetics in these states around Mexico due to the monoculture and due to the ecological destruction of planting agave. And here's the thing, what else do you lose when you just have a hillside of agave and you take out the forest or the savanna or you take out the desert? Everybody thinks the desert's dead. No, it's so alive. It has so much shit. Deserts account for a lot of the CO2 uptake around the world. That wouldn't happen if it wasn't a functioning ecosystem. Okay? So no matter what ecosystem it is, there's lots of agaves there in Mexico, cacti, that are being destroyed and the genetics are being lost. Who knows how many Vilmoriana cultivars are out there because we haven't researched them. Nobody gave a fuck about this until the past few decades. Gentry was, Howard Scott Gentry, the guy, the godfather of agave, who wrote this great book on agave and to let everybody know all the Latin names, and he researched the crap out of everyone, all of them. Even that fool didn't even know about a lot of the classified agaves that have come out in the past few years. It was so niche back then. So I just find it super sad that we're prioritizing a boom of mezcal and tequila and not prioritizing the environment because once again coming back to environmental externalities, God, I love college in UC Santa Barbara because I took this environmental economics class and that's when I started realizing the environmental externalities and the cost behind them and how to calculate them and stuff, right? So it's like, let me put it to you this way. Say I don't know the exact number. Let me see if I can bring it up really quick on tequila market in the United States value, right? So I'm thinking it's around probably like 8 billion. Yeah, 8.7 billion in 2023. So it's probably crossed 9 billion now in 2024. Sure they'll update that soon. So Even if all the USA tequila or tequila that is sold to the USA is 9 billion, let's just put it that way. You think there's not 9 billion of environmental externalities that they're not accounting for by destroying the environment? What's the cost of losing your aquifers? What's the cost of losing healthy forests that can sequestrate carbon next to Guadalajara, which is one of the most polluted cities in Mexico and one of the largest? What is the cost of losing your soils that are productive? You know what I mean? Because now that you destroy all these, environmental relationships between all the trees and plants and ground covers and animals, and you just have agave there that you chemically maintain to not have anything else be there. What's the environmental cost of that? How much money did the country lose there? Right? Because this is where research needs to come in, and the environmental economics people need to be going maybe to Mexico if they don't exist, or the ones there need to be fucking with a higher voice. Say it took 15 billion of environmental externalities to produce 10 billion of tequila. That's a fucking problem. You get me? That's a fucking problem, man. Because you're losing more money in production than you're actually, or you're losing more money in resources than you're actually gaining in production. How the hell is that a sound business decision for any country? You get me? And that's why environmental economics is a great topic because it starts putting into perspective how certain productions shouldn't be prioritized. Because you could have that 9 billion of tequila come from those or of mezcal. Mezcal is probably 700 million. So say it's 10 billion together, the mezcal plus tequila. You could have that 10 billion of mezcal and tequila come from these really innovative small farms, you know? But if you're not accounting for the environmental externalities, then, the price that they're putting you see is super high, but they're actually saving the environment, saving the tradition, saving the culture is worth it, you know? That's why I always tell people mezcal and tequila should be honestly double and triple the price. But people wouldn't buy it. And when you go to these small brands, they are double and triple the $50 bottle that you could go buy. They're gonna be 100, 150, sometimes $200 because they do it in a way that doesn't destroy the environment, doesn't destroy its people, doesn't destroy its culture. You know what I mean? Don't even get me started on this BS with tequila and how they're destroying tequila by allowing additives in it and allowing the majority of tequila production coming from multinational corporations that are not Mexican owned. Don't even get me started on that. So, well, actually might have to get started on that because my third point is losing control of agave industry. So Mexico has completely, in my opinion, lost control of its agave industry to large multinational corporations. So if the largest entities that are making, um, agave spirits in Jalisco, if the largest ones are, for instance, multinationals that are American and European owned, that's why a lot of these problems with Mexico, nobody's giving a fuck about. Because these people are in the office in Europe or America, seeing their quarterly reports go up every year, George Foreman and all these big corporations. They could care less sometimes about Mexico because they're not even there to see all the damage that's being created, you know? Let me give an example here. It's like, look at Napa Valley. You know what I mean? Harvard owns wineries there. LVMH, one of the largest fashion brand owned wineries there. Treasury Wine Estates. These guys are Australian and they own like thousands of acres in Napa. You get me? What happens when large multinational corporations are the only big players in an industry? Lots of problems. Lots of problems. I think that's what Mexican agave is starting to show. Because when it was small scale, all family owned and Mexican owned, we didn't have a lot of these environmental issues. We didn't have a lot of these groundwater issues, a lot of these environmental destruction issues. So
Yeah, it's easy to have those issues when the people, like I mentioned, are not even in the fucking country or in the locale or in the state of Mexico seeing what the hell is occurring. Okay? So I think that it's we don't want that same issue to come to California. That's why I bring it up. You know what I mean? Right now, you have a lot of small farms in California. You got some big farms. But I don't want to see what happened in Napa come to agave, where large companies in Australia and Britain and the Wall Street is owning a lot of giant agave spirit farms. Because what do you think is going to happen? They're going to be the big chemical. They're going to be the big ag. They're going to be the ones playing monoculture, not giving a fuck about people or environment. Okay? We want to keep it small. And when I say small, we don't need to just have everybody growing in 1, 2 acres for everyone. Okay. The USDA classifies farms, small farms as under 500 acres. Okay. Big ag is, there, I mean, there's farms that are 30,000 acres. You know, you go to Australia and some places around, there's farms that are hundreds of thousands and millions of acres. It's insane, you know? So yeah, we could have a couple hundred acre farms, and you can have a lot of 5 and 10 and 20 acre farms, and together, I want them to be as powerful as these big conglomerates, or we're going to be pushed aside. So prioritize buying in Mexico from these small brands, in Australia from these small brands, in California from these small brands. Don't start supporting the big multinational corporations because that's what's causing a lot of the issues in the industry, in my opinion. You know, I'm not calling any specific company out or anything. I think it's a industry-wide problem. So, I mean, I could probably go on about that, MNCs for a good while, but let's just go to the next point because, that a lot of these could probably be its own separate podcast, so I don't want to go too crazy, I just want to highlight them. So, the fourth one that I think that is a problem in Mexico that Americans and Californians specifically are going to copy is tossing aside the indigenous knowledge, right? So if we all try to just do monoculture agave here in California, like the Mexicans are doing in the majority of places, it's going to hinder a lot of the innovation and you know get rid of a lot of the tradition and culture that has been saved, right? So agave has been grown in not only Mexico, but America, the United States, for thousands of years by dozens of different tribes and indigenous, people. So, I'll give you an example. In Mexico, a lot of the agave, um, has been used, recently for spirits. But a lot of the agaves that are being used that are USA natives and California natives by the indigenous today in California, uh, they're using them to consume. So they're eating them. They're eating the flowers. They're eating the piñas, and they're trying to reignite a lot of that culture that was lost, right? And the same thing in Mexico. A lot of people are starting to eat it again. People are starting to, eat the flowers and the stalks again and use them in, culinary stuff. So Mexico plus America has tossed aside the indigenous knowledge in favor of this large monoculture, industrial, big ag form of agriculture. You get me? Because the indigenous, the points that I was talking about before, right? Like they took care of the environment, they took care of the people, they took care of the agave, biodiversity and the biodiversity in the environment that the agave grew in. These things really were starting to get destroyed as modernity and an American style of agriculture came in, right? So, I mean, most countries around the world practice regenerative farming until, the 20th century when petrochemicals and a lot of these um, companies that were producing big oils started producing agricultural chemicals. And then you got stuff like, DuPont and, Bayer and Monsanto popping out. And these companies, focused on creating a monoculture system that could be expanded around the whole world for every crop that was highly dependent on uh, uh, chemicals to sustain that, right? As well as we've mentioned, destroying groundwater systems and environment systems, systems that weren't economically being accounted for, politically being accounted for, that, you know, because we don't have a cost on them or a number of their value, they get to destroy and not give nobody gives a fuck, you know? So tossing aside the indigenous knowledge, I think is a huge issue that California needs to not go down the same path, right? So there's a lot of small innovative farms in Mexico that are still practicing a lot of that traditional knowledge and growing the agave in the right way, right? In this ecologically diverse farm. And they're also continuing to respect the people and the environment, right? So California, for instance, needs to start uh, reconnecting with a lot of these indigenous groups. Here, as a California agave farmer, I'm like, well, how can I help them, right? Save their culture and expand their culture. And, I'll give you an example. Agave Shawi only has two USA populations left in the wild, right? I have more agave Shawi probably in a couple greenhouses than there is in the wild. That's and I'm a small collector. There's probably giant collectors that's thinking about this too that has a bunch of them. And the point I'm making is, how the hell do you even practice your agave culture? Like for the Native Americans in San Diego County that practice the cultivation and utilization of agave shawi, how do they save that culture or expand that culture if no agave shawi exists? So my goal is to try to dedicate 5, 10, 15, maybe if I can, spread it financially back to these people for restoration. So then they can start using their agave shawi. Why? Because a lot of these traditional indigenous folks, like once they have, I believe, their agave back into their culture and they start utilizing it, they're gonna remember back a lot of the stuff their grandparents told them. Because a lot of their history is oral history, right? So a lot of they talk about how they used agave and made baskets and made blankets and made clothes and all of this, right? So if you want to bring that back, that use of it, like people are like, oh, why isn't there a big old agave company that's making clothes or whatever? There's a bunch of them. We eliminated them. You get me? By getting rid of indigenous knowledge. These were the people that were making that. I give you an example. Back in my grandpa's time, a lot of the people still used agave clothes that were white and tan colored because they were super durable. You didn't need to clean them as often. They wicked, so you could sweat in them and they would breathe like a lot of, Under Armour or a lot of, the sportswear from Nike. And they were produced sustainably. I don't think you can say that about many cotton t-shirt brands or any of the clothes that's being produced, right? So if we want to bring these innovative practices back, like agave clothing, we need to have the indigenous have access to agave and preserving their culture and tradition, not only in Mexico, in America, in the United States. You know what I mean? When I say, by the way, America, I'm referring to the United States. I know as a historian, people classify America as the whole continent and shit, but no, that doesn't make sense to me because one, there's three continents, so it's North, South, and Central America, and there's a bunch of countries. So, and many of them don't like each other and stuff, so it's weird for me to try it. Like I get where y'all are coming from. Just let me say that, when people are like, "Oh, America's all the Americas," then I would say the Americas. I'm not gonna say America for the whole thing. When I refer to America, I refer to the United States. I don't care what everyone else's opinion is on that, to be honest. Um, but just so you don't confuse yourself, right? Um, so yeah, the loss of indigenous knowledge is a huge problem for California and Mexico. I'll give you another example. They're starting to roast agaves here in California, or not starting. They've been roasting agaves here in California, and the Pachanga tribe has an annual roast in April every year. You could go and see how they roast agave deserti, which they cultivated their tribe. I forget because the Pachanga is what they call themselves now, but they're part of a bigger tribe. which I forget what uh, tribe they are. You know, because right now they're like the Morongo Reservation, but we're a bigger band of Native Americans, which I forget the name right now. My bad. But the point that I'm making here is they grew agave deserti, which is a California agave that's native here, and they grew it for 1,000, 2,000 years, and now they've lost a lot of that culture and tradition, so they're trying to bring it back through the roast, but they only do it once a year because they don't have a lot of desserty, and the roast is just like a couple dozen, or I don't know, maybe like 100 or 200 agave, and because they're desserty, they're small enough to where they can make all types of edible foods with them and have them for people to try. It's a really cool event. You should attend it if you're a member. It's in April every year. And the point I'm trying to make here is if I could produce some disserty for these tribes to utilize more, then maybe they can expand on their agave knowledge and culture and bring a lot of that back for modernity, not to take advantage of, but to take inspiration from and to apply to create much more sustainable agave companies. So yeah, that was our fourth point, tossing aside the indigenous knowledge. I think it's a huge issue that we don't want to happen here in California. If we don't give a fuck about these native tribes here, then we're going to lose a lot of innovation potential. We're going to lose a lot of the people that uh, have a lot of agave knowledge here in California and around the United States. People have been cultivating it for a long time, so a lot of us are newly beginning the cultivation of, for instance, the Hohokam agave, agave crescenta or agave, havardiana. But I mean, there's been tribes cultivating them for not only decades and centuries, but millennia, right? So it's like we should learn from them, and if we cut them out and don't give a fuck about them, then we're not advancing. You know what I mean? And at the same time, like I mentioned, they grew agave in a very sustainable way. So there's so many ways to learn from them. Look at rock mulching that was practiced by the Hohokam. They used rocks to throw around their agaves to stop gopher, ground squirrel, and predation by small rodents. So like as you research these tribes and give them more agave, you're gonna learn on how they cultivated and took care of this agave and apply that knowledge. And I believe that's a very useful and important thing. So we'll get to the fifth point now, which is tapping water resources. So before in Mexico, the majority of agave was dry farmed, but now as climate is starting to change and the rain is starting to change, people are starting to drill wells and collect a lot of that water to irrigate their agave farms. And now they're starting to put pressures on aquifers that never had pressure before, right? Because they weren't groundwater pumping. And in this case, it's not only the farmers, it's the distillers as well. Many distillers are pumping, have giant wells and are pumping, large amounts of groundwater in areas where the whole city doesn't even have water infrastructure or clean water or to run through their pipes. So it's like, is it correct for a distillery to have access to an aquifer and take advantage of it for decades when the population above which the aquifer sits doesn't even get to take advantage or uh, benefit from that, right? Those are those environmental externalities, right? Like the aquifer is everybody, it's a common resource. But if only one gets to benefit from that, that's a huge problem. And you're starting to see these problems highlighted in Jalisco, where people are seeing the levels of Lake Chapala, which is close to my hometown, El Luzco and Mercado, drop and drop and drop. And they say the lake's going to disappear. And that's due to a lot of the groundwater pumping that's occurring. You know what I mean? So it's not good to be expanding agave into all these different areas where it wasn't naturally dry farmed or are drier, and then they're going to have to irrigate it. You know, here in California, I tell you, I dry farm my agave. I try to look for the species that I can grow off of just the rain, and then I can supplement with rainwater that I collect. Now, the big ag coming into California, they got giant fucking wells, and they're irrigating the crap out of their agave. You know what I mean? That's going to create a whole sort of pest issues and a whole sort of of other issues, but I think the biggest issue is just how I just explained that one big company could be taking the common resource of the whole county or the whole state, these aquifers, and that is an enormous issue. I believe nobody is really thinking about much until recently, but more people need to start thinking about it. Um, and that's going to come to California too. I mean, everybody's talking about, oh, low water use of agave, low water use of agave. Do they not know that distilling agave takes a lot of water? You know what I mean? Like it takes a good amount of water, man. So if you produce millions of agave, you will need tens of millions of gallons of water to produce that into spirits, man. And I have not seen one person ask, okay, if this many acreage in California was put to agave, how much more added water pressure would that add, right? So it's like if we're getting rid of wineries and vineyards, right? Like we plant agave and have distilleries, what's the comparison, right? So if you got 100 acres of grapes and you got a distillery that takes those 100 acres of grapes and uses water, right? What's the comparison between 100 acres grown of agave and then 100 acres of agave going into the production of a distill, right? That research needs to be done, and I don't have the money or nor time to do it by myself. So hopefully other people can add on to this, right? Um, and then not only the water resources, like, look at the rivers. This probably won't happen in California, but there are rivers being destroyed in Mexico due to a lot of the runoff from distilleries. You know what I mean? And maybe not the largest rivers, because they probably fucking destroy that company, but some small rivers and streams are being disappeared and polluted because of the big industry and lack of environmental regulation. That's something we don't want in California. We don't want these small streams and water systems to be destroyed. Like, sure, there's going to be a lot more environmental regulation in California on tapping water resources. Like, we put meters on wells, we put meters on the city water, we put meters on, and the more you use, the more expensive it is. So it incentivizes you to use less, right? Um, and now they can limit what you pump from your wells. These are things that do not exist in Mexico, right? So now the Sigma Act in California, which I've mentioned a few times on the podcast, makes it so you can't pump an unsustainable amount of groundwater anymore from the county. So now, I give an example. Say LA County had 100 farmers, and these 100 farmers, the Sigma regulation realizes that they're pumping 10% more water than is being pumped back into the aquifer. They're going to need to basically cut 10% of, their water use. And that is going to come from a county as a whole, might come from certain pockets, might come from a little bit from everybody. Who knows how that will be distributed, those cuts, right? So sometimes it might be down that an agency wants to cut, small farmers. Who knows, right? That's something that in California we're starting to see. A great example might be some of the valley or the Central Valley water districts and how they're being mandatory cut now because they couldn't figure out how to voluntary cut to save the aquifer. So the state now is stepping in and saying, you're going to cut and we're going to make you do it this way, X, Y, Z, right? What I'm afraid of also on that side is how and who gets cut, right? I don't want it to just the cuts come from the small farmers who don't have political power, right? So you gotta be careful there. But where I was going is this isn't happening in Mexico, right? Mexico, you can pump whatever the fuck you want from your well. It doesn't matter if the city doesn't have water or if the city depends on another well and you're dropping their water level. Stuff like that, to be honest with you, is bad in Mexico. But here's why I relate it to California and the U.S. because agave is not only going to go to California with high environmental regulation, it has a high probability. I already, I own land in Nevada and Arizona, and I think those are amazing states to grow agave. And there is very, very low environmental regulation in these states. So a lot of the problems that you're seeing in Mexico may not come to California in every way, but I guarantee you, will come to Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, oh, and Texas, I guarantee, right? So there might be a lot of water externalities we're not accounting for, like pollution and chemical runoff and all types of shit, right? So it's like, look at Napa. You got a hillside of grapes, you fertilize it, right? Now it rains and you have fertilizer runoff, and then that's why there's huge algae blooms in Clear Lake and in these large, lake systems in California close to winery regions. So the same thing I'm starting to see happen in lakes around the tequila regions in Jalisco. I'm not sure if that's the case in Oaxaca, but I would assume. And a lot of this algae is coming from the excessive chemical fertilizers that are being applied to grow agave faster. And how we always talk about a faster growing agave doesn't mean a better agave. If an agave comes out in 5 years, there's a high likelihood that it was heavily fertilized and essentially maybe we'll have a lot of sugar, but they will be extremely simple sugars that do not have a wide array of flavors to be worked on. So, do you really want that if you're a niche distiller? I mean, some people want it, but I don't. Um, let's get to number six, overregulation. So, I think, hold on one second, I gotta go get my doggy. It got stuck in the fence. We are back in 15 seconds. Yeah, so what I was saying is that I don't want the same issue of overregulation to come to California. And I believe Mexico is overregulating their agave uh, in some ways and not regulating them in others, right? Like we just talked about the environment and different things that they're not regulating as hard. But then they have a fucking DO and they say, oh, you can't say your mezcal is mezcal, right? So it's like mezcal's been produced in every Mexican state. The fact that they only limit it to a certain amount of states has basically stripped the culture and word from, you know, dozens of other states that now can't practice their own tradition and culture. That's bullshit in my opinion. You get me? So it's like before the gnomes or the gnomes, the DOs, of tequila and mezcal, you had a lot of production of mezcal, raicilla, sotol, bacanora. You had colonche, you had tepa, you had all these cool ass fucking things, right, coming out and people producing them. And then when the DO comes out, everybody's, well, we can only make money with tequila and mezcal. Fuck growing everything but espadín and tequiliana. So it's like, if you overregulate in what genetics you can use, it fucks the whole industry. You know what I mean? And I don't like how they overregulated, like I said, in the genetics. Oh, you can only use this and that, and you can't call it this or that. But they don't regulate the environment. They don't regulate how you start stuff from seed in Narijuelo. They don't regulate how to take care of people, how to fair pay people, how the shit should be, you know, how the industry should be good. Like they regulate it in an extremely stupid way. And once again, correlating this back to California, now we're passing laws in California that I believe is going to limit our innovation and our potential to be a great agave producer and business. And look at California AB 2606. Now they want to pass taxes and assessments on yearly assessments on agave growers that, I could be growing a 15-year-old agave and pay 15 years of fucking taxes and assessments before I even have a chance to make $1 off it. Overregulation will be the death of agaveros, no matter the country. No matter the country. It's not people are like, oh, it's Mexico versus California or it's Mexico versus Australia. Get that shit out your head. It's small agaveros against big ag. And big ag in Mexico is fucking everybody. Big ag in California is fucking everybody. Realize that, okay? Because we don't have the numbers in every country. But together, globally, we can fucking bully whoever we need to bully, okay? That's a big ag player. So We need to stop fighting in between each other. And that's what they want. They want everybody to be fighting in between each other because then we're all weak. Okay? So the overregulation is just the worst, bro. I mean, if you know me, I fucking hate regulation. I'm an entrepreneur. I believe that the market regulates everything. Government needs to stay the fuck out of it. You know, I'm more of that Thomas Jefferson type. I think the best government is the smallest possible needed for the citizens to be free. Anything above that is no good. So in Mexico, for instance, I look at Oaxaca. Oaxaca feeds dozens of agave, and 99%, I would even say, is all espadín. So even in places where they can use tons of agave, the DO forces everybody to do espadín because that's what everybody's been proven to grow fast and go into the market, and it's the majority, right? So if the majority of mezcal is espadín, you kind of don't want to mess with the market too much and do some portotorum and stuff because it's going to be niche, right? So if everybody's selling their espadín at $50 a bottle, and you come over here with a $200 tepestate, you're at an economic disadvantage. Not even gonna fucking lie to you. Only people like me who understand the industry is gonna buy your shit, your niche. You get me? So that's where I actually think maybe mixing will come in and stuff. I think they're gonna start mixing a lot of espadín with tepestate and different other things to make it more affordable for people, you know? But yeah, overregulation, extremely bad. I was talking to another example with my homie the other day about how California agave spirits, if you want to use that name, it's kind of like a DO now because I can't bring in agave from Arizona and distill it here, even though it would, like if I distill something in California, it's a fucking California agave spirit. I don't give a fuck what law is passed, right? And the California Agave Spirits law even says that. It says if you want to use the exact denomination of California Agave Spirits, you need to produce it in California and have it distilled in California. But one, there's no proof verification of that. Who was able to prove that? The California Agave Council? I don't fucking trust them. The state? I don't fucking trust them. You know? So who can verify that? One. But two, here's the other thing. If I can't bring in agave from Arizona and call it here, uh, even though it's made here, that's idiotic. You're getting rid of correct labeling. You get me? Because if I bring any product into America and I assemble it here, it's an American product. So to say that a spirit that is distilled in California will not be a California agave spirit just because some asshole wanted to pass a law, that makes no sense to me. And that hinders farmers because you think Arizona's gonna fucking like that? If Arizona sees California doing that shit, they're gonna say, "Oh, we only want Arizona agave spirits. We don't want anybody importing California agave into Arizona." Do these people making these laws realize that they are just fucking the farmers? Because now they've limited us to where we could sell. And the same shit is happening in Mexico. You know what I mean? So it's like if you can only sell tequila in Jalisco, you're not gonna focus on producing the 10 different traditional agaves that were grown there, like Maximiliana and Potatorum and Salmiana, and all of these have various cultivars. They're not. It just over-regulation will destroy genetics, will destroy the small farm, and will destroy the environment and the people. I don't understand why people don't realize that. Regulation, all it does is usually stop innovation and entrepreneurs and help big people. Because let me tell you what, you think the people like you and me are in this room crafting the legislation? I give you a recent example of the California legislation passed. No small farmer was in the room. It was quite literally only big farmers and big ag. And the same shit happens in Mexico. Go look at the COT protests that just happened in Mexico, in Jalisco. Those were small farmers protesting. I don't see fucking George Foreman out there protesting. I don't see Casamigos protesting.
I don't see any of these big fucking brands protesting. Why? Because the system benefits them. Realize who the fuck is protesting, and that should tell you everything about whether you support them. You know, the day I see George Foreman protesting, I'm gonna say some shit is fucked up. I give you an example. George Foreman, I read a bunch of articles talking about how they're preparing for the Trump tariff, right? And man, they're preparing in a lot of different ways. You know, they are not preparing for this thing out of, the kindness of their heart. They want to be profitable. The number one goal of their industry or their company is to make a profit. Compare that with some of these other mezcaleros that the number one goal of them is to continue to practice their culture. Two very different goals. Okay. So, I mean, I could go about that for days, but we'll keep it short. That was number six, over regulation. Go to number seven now. The majority of agave going into spirits. This is a fucking issue. This is an issue. So now you're starting to hear about this being fed to cows, and they're starting to try to want to make biofuels in Mexico. Why? Because this shit's on the floor. That's when they can innovate. When this shit's at $1 or 1 or 2 pesos a kilo, right? Because it's practically worthless. You might as well experiment. You get me? That experimentation people aren't going to want to do as much in California and when the price goes back up in Mexico because it's expensive. Why would you risk the experimentation like me and blow tens of thousands just to figure out ideas? A lot of people don't want to do that innovation and or innovation investment. So I give you an example of why the price is 1, 2 pesos. When you can only make spirits in Mexico from your agave and it's only being sold as a commodity, you fucked yourself. You completely fucked yourself. You know what I mean? If there was a biofuel industry, an energy industry, a sapponin research industry, look at the pulque industry. If every one of those industries existed in Jalisco, the price would be stable because when this shit is not being used as much for spirits, they would use it for fodder. When it's not being used as much for fodder, they would use it for energy production. You get me, okay? I don't need to say all of them. The point being that when it all goes to one use and that use has a bad market, you've completely screwed the whole industry. That's why I tell everybody in California we don't want to go through the same thing. From the beginning, we need to start talking to energy companies and saying, how can we make agave fit in your profile? You know, like, look at the Australian sugar company that used sugar cane to run an energy plant for a small city, and now they've supplemented that with agave. Why the fuck can't we build an agave plant here in California and run a small little city off agave? You know, we can't. We just need to start doing it. And then if the price of agave spirits in California is low, or say the agave commodity is low because it's only going into spirits, you go give it to PG&E, make fucking energy. You know? Oh, there's a lot of energy, or agave going into energy. Well, go give it to fucking DuPont or anybody else that's gonna be working on biofuels. Go give it to the aviation industry. Tell them how can we fucking make a biofuel out of agave for you guys, right? From the beginning, California needs to realize the issue here of focusing only on one industry in Mexico and realize we need to have at least 10. I'm shooting for 10 and I'm trying to develop that for the industry. Sure, it'll benefit me, but at the end of the day, it'll benefit everybody. I believe that if we don't diversify and we only have agave as a commodity, a monoculture commodity, we're screwed. Because every agave has different chemicals, has different properties, different sugars, different sugar chain molecules. Every single one is so different. I'll give you an example right here. When you look at agave syrup and you look at agave syrup comparison between
an agave syrup made from Tequiliana and Salmiana. Very simple comparison right there. And both those are very heavy cloned. But even then, you see a very different uh, sugar complexity and diversity from the Salmiana than you do from the Tequiliana. If I remember correctly, don't quote me. I believe that Tequiliana is mostly fructan, and then you start getting different types of sugars, which are more complex than Salmiana. So, you know, once again, maybe Tequiliana and Espadilla are going to give you a lot of sugar, but do you want a lot of some basic ass shit? You know, that's why these other varieties are going to be worth more. You know, so I could go like I mentioned with each of these points a lot into that, but we'll just keep it short for that. If you got any questions on, what other uses I could go into, that's leave it in the comments. We'll talk about it. But yeah, point number 7, as the majority of agave going into spirits, it's bad for Mexico, it's bad for California, it's bad for Australia, it's bad for everybody. Bad for everybody. Okay? We don't want to have the same issues coming to California as in Mexico right now, where they're just a commodity. You get me? Like I give you an example, like look at corn. Corn's a commodity. But there's like 10,000 fucking products made with corn. There's people buying the commodity of corn. There's people growing 1,000 different heritage corn varieties of Mexico. There's so much differentiation, right? But then, same thing. GMO, Kansas corn is all the same. So, but we wanted that really diverse, the amount of commodities and diversity. So, last 3 points here. But number 8. We're going to chemical use and pesticide use, right? So I'm really bummed out. Sorry, I have to pause real quick. So what I was saying is that I'm just really bummed out about how much chemical use is happening in Mexico. And we don't want that to come to California. I'm already starting to see the early signs of that, and it's starting to piss me off. Okay. Um, that's once again why we do not want to plant a monoculture system. Because when you have a monoculture system, and everything's the same, it's too high of a risk if one little plague gets in or one little pest. So you pre-emergent spray for herbicides, you pre-emergent spray for pests, you pre-emergent spray for all of these issues like fungus. That's a big issue, right? So a lot of the agave weevil, I'll give you an example. They're coming up with successful chemical treatments in America or in the United States that now they're pre-emergent, and by pre-emergent I mean before the issue arises. That's what pre-emergent means. They're applying these chemicals to the agave so that the weevil never wants to be in this agave. This is a problem. This is a huge problem. Okay, like in my case, if a disease comes to an agave, fuck that agave. I just let it die. I'm not gonna try to come in and be God and try to save everything, dude. Like that's why I tell you they can't handle that because they got a huge monoculture. If I see a row of agave die and it's all, I'll give you an example, Tequiliana that gets disease, I'm like, fuck that row. I just go plant a whole bunch of other Tequiliana from seed or from another cultivar or another species like Americana or Vilmoriana. But when you have 1,000 acre farm and it's all the same, you can't have those losses. You lose one plant, you lose them all. Okay? So chemicals in Mexico. They're spraying them as herbicides. They're spraying them to keep the worms away that were traditionally part of agave knowledge and history and are highly valued. Once again, people not realizing what they're doing. I mean, some of these fucking worms are selling for more than they're selling their agaves, and they're killing the worms through chemicals. Stupid. Okay. Then there's all types of issues. Look at a lot of the chemicals now in California that Mexicans sprayed as harvesters and as weed management and pest management. Now many of them are starting to get cancer. My own people that worked in the vineyards, are the ones that are most susceptible because as a vineyard consultant, I'll straight up tell you, Roundup is in the majority of California fucking vineyards. That's why I personally don't drink California wine unless I know the grower and I know they are not using chemicals. But that's happening a lot in the agave in Mexico. You know, if you go to certain big brand websites, I won't call them out, they directly tell you what chemicals they're using in their chemical program. It's so stupid, bro. It's not even funny. Because they sit there and tell you that weed management is great through chemicals because this allows for an efficient price for you as a consumer. I tell you what, you know, I could use a lot of chemicals or I could use a lot of labor, but it's more expensive than using animals for the fertilization and the cleanup. You know what I mean? So the they're just using it because it's easier, not because it's better or more efficient or better for you. Fuck that. That's a lie. They're doing it because it's easier for them. In the case of vineyard management in Napa, it was the same case. Roundup could be loaded up on a fucking ATV. You could go spread the whole field in 25 minutes. Now, compare that to I got to bring in 1,000 sheep to clear and fertilize. Much more involved system, but when you account for the sheep business, you're making way more money. The fact that they alienated animals from agriculture has led to a lot of this chemical use, you know. So I don't want California to go through the same issues of heavy chemical problems because as I was mentioning earlier, the runoff, it causes algae blooms, it causes all types of problems. Like look at the Salton Sea, you know why there's all types of air pollution happening and people getting all types of respiratory problems. That's because there was agricultural runoff that drained into that sea, and because there's no replenishment of water, now it's become a fucking toxic zone. Now this is a huge issue. You get me? That's a lot of the problems that are starting to happen in Mexico. So you're starting to see, you know, in some of these places, the groundwater could be very under the soil, like not very far under the soil. So you're starting to have a lot of groundwater being polluted by a lot of the chemicals that they're using in agave farms. And it's just such a huge issue. Even Lake Chapala and a lot of the lakes, right? So we don't want a lot of those chemical use issues, pesticide issues, fungicide issues coming to California and the rest of the world. Once again, we need to copy the good from Mexico and gain inspiration from the good in Mexico, not the bad. You know, there's innumerous examples in Mexico of people sustainably growing agave in a very ecological way with lots of different plants and agave species, taking care of humans and the environment. You need to look towards those people for inspiration. Don't go over here trying to copy Big Ag, you know what I mean? Because you're just gonna lead yourself into a huge hole. Um, yeah, I could go on that forever. But let's go to number 9, tractor and heavy machinery use. So agave traditionally was grown all human, from planting to harvest. Now they're starting to use in Mexico a lot of tractors to plant. They're starting to use a lot of tractors to spray the chemicals. And if you know me, I don't really like tractors in agave. I think it compacts the soil. You have a lot of water retention issues with that. You have a lot of the ground cover being destroyed. You have a lot of labor being lost. So, for instance, like a lot of the jobs in agriculture used to be like I give you an example. If you had an 8 hour day, you would have some jobs that were tough, some jobs that were easy, and then you know it would balance itself out. But now you have, for instance, the tractor doing all the easy planting, and then you have, you know, the hemodoras at the end coming in and harvesting, and they're having a lot of issues in their arms and their shoulders and lots of problems, right? Physically, because they're only doing one job. Whereas before, you know, an agave worker would plant, he would manage, he would harvest, he would do everything. So now the machines are coming in and removing jobs. They're not only giving less money to families because there's less workers in agave, The ones that are left are being left with physical problems, which that's not good. If to create tequila and mezcal, you have to have all your laborers focus on certain one type jobs and they're having health issues. That's not good, man. It's not good. We don't want that to come to California where a lot of our agaveros are now going to be having physical problems and then, the soil is going to be compacted and not be able to absorb the rain. And then, we have so much machinery that people don't want to be. This is another thing I was trying to get to. It's like in Mexico, a lot of people are moving to the cities now and don't even want to be in agriculture because the agricultural jobs that are left are all heavy. They're pesado. So it's like, the planting was one of these easier jobs that would kind of be like the break in between these big jobs. And now that they're giving it to the machines and stuff, the people have lost their job and the people left got a lot of problems because they're focusing on one type of job. I don't want that tractor and heavy machinery use to come into California, if I'm honest with you. And I'm already seeing that, which is why I made this podcast, because we're going through the same dumbass problems that Mexico had, and it's an issue. You know what I mean? In California, I present the same example. If you get rid of planting and management, and all the people are doing is coming in at the end and harvesting, they've lost a lot of jobs. People only doing the tough jobs, and then they don't want to come and work in agave because they're like, "Fuck that! Humidor is a hard ass job. I don't want to go do that if that's the only job available." And then if they can't find humidors because of that, guess what they're going to do? They're going to try to automate it, and then you lose a bunch of humidor jobs. So what I don't want is machines. So I don't want these big corporations to look at machines as, oh, we don't have to pay laborers and take care of laborers, and we could just use these machines that are running off diesel to pollute the environment and replace humans and all of that, right? And there's a lot of problems with that. I love tractors and I love heavy machinery for a lot of issues. I got a, bad back. I love lifting rocks with the bobcat or whatever. But it's like in the rows, nothing. I don't want them in there. And there's some maybe a lot of people don't agree with, but I just wanted to highlight it because it's something that I think is a huge issue that's coming to California. We're gonna be using heavy machinery to do a lot of this agave farming, and it's gonna create all sorts of fucking issues for our soils and our people. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I'm missing there, but getting to point number 10. So this point is exporting most of the agave and spirits to only one country. So Mexico, the majority of mezcal and tequila comes to only the United States, and it's a $9 billion industry, $10 billion industry, how we were talking about a little earlier. So if this is the case, and you're just under a lot of threats. It's not a smart concept. You should be diversified in what countries you send your stuff to. Mexico should be trying to send it to Ireland. They should be trying to send it to France, where they drink a lot of cognac, or whatever the fuck they pronounce it. They should be sending it to different Latin American countries. Brazil, it's the second largest economy in Latin America, and the one time I went to Brazil, it's like there's fucking no good tequila there. You know what I mean? Go G4, go get in Brazil. Fortaleza, go get in Brazil. There's nothing over there that is better than you. You know what I mean? Um, but the point that I'm getting towards, look at what Trump's trying to do. He's trying to pass a 25% tariff, right? And I was talking earlier about how George Foreman is fucking shitting bricks because they're like, well, we're already losing money on tequila this year. Now there's going to be a 25% tariff. Shit, we might sell the whole portfolio. Fuck that. You know? Um, if all your shit is going to one country, it's a huge problem. Because if that one country suddenly politically decides they don't like you, like Trump is looking like it is right now, there's a lot of issues. If tequila is 25% more expensive, that's where California agave spirits is going to try to come in. That's where Australian agave spirits is going to try to come in. You get me? So if you, for instance, only export to America as a Mexican agave industry. And now there's more tariffs.
It puts you at a competitive disadvantage to every other country producing agave spirits. So Mexico needs to diversify the amount of countries it ships out to. And once again, this is always correlating it back to California. That's why we made this podcast. California can't be a dumbass and try to only sell in California or only sell just, for example, say our big buyer just happens to be in Tennessee or Spain and we're selling all our shit to Spain. We better fucking diversify and start selling some shit to China and Taiwan. And like, I give you an example. I've shipped agave to China, Thailand, Japan, Hong Kong. There are so many Asian countries and Latin American countries that love agave. They love growing it. Peru, uh, uh, Bolivia, Guatemala, Brazil. There's so many countries that love agave. Those are the countries maybe we need to start introducing agave spirits into because they've been growing the plants for decades and decades. Okay? So, and this doesn't only apply to spirits. This is just the only example I have because everybody's making fucking spirits. I always tell people if the only thing that agave goes into in my lifetime is majority spirits, I consider my life a failure because the whole point of what I'm doing is to allow agave to go all over the world and to be used in a wide array of products. I think agave can revolutionize the world, and it's not going to do that by getting everybody fucking drunk. It's going to do that by creating energy, by creating cancer fighting properties or cures, by creating all these new, different, innovative things that agave already is being shown it can do. So California needs to focus on a diverse amount of products, diverse amount of clientele, a diverse amount of countries that we ship stuff to. We can't be a freaking idiot and try to do what Mexico is doing, even though I don't say that they're idiots, but I'm just saying we don't want to be an idiot, you know, and do what Mexico is doing of only shipping to one country. And that, watch somebody that ships to kill. Oh, we ship to Japan and we ship to fucking Thailand and we ship. Look, bro, it's less than 1%. Don't make me bring the graphs in. You know what I mean? You know the numbers better than me. And I'll tell you what, America is the large majority of agave spirits globally. You get me? In Australia, in South America, in Venezuela, in Guatemala, in Germany, places where they're making agave spirits. Who do you think they're trying to sell to? Mexico? No, the United States, because we got the money, we got the clientele. So once again, we can't be like fucking one trick pony. Okay, we want to take agave everywhere, and California will be the most diverse industry, I believe, because we're already starting to think about this from the beginning. I'm putting this podcast out so that you realize, not to hate on Mexico, man. I'm Mexican. I'm born in Mexico. I love Mexico. Go there all the time. But it's like, it's like people when they get mad at me for criticizing the United States, even though I'm a citizen. And I'm like, look, bro, that's freedom of speech. Thank God we have the ability to criticize our government to improve. And the same thing with our businesses. You know, I love when people criticize my business or criticize how I do something as an entrepreneur. You know why? Because more than likely, that's usually where you fail. You get me? So they're kind of saving you from a future fuck up by reminding you of it early. How can you even get mad at that? So the Mexicans know what I'm talking about is true. The Americans know it's true. They know what's up. So it's not like we're trying to hate on anybody here. We're trying to make Mexico and California and USA and Australia and South Africa and everybody improve. And we need examples to learn to improve. And thank God we can, have lots of friends in Mexico that I talk to that I know all this information and can distribute it to you because now you cannot do the same fuck ups. So, you know, learn from these podcasts and make sure that you're going to be a diverse agave farmer, someone who's not destroying the environment, prioritizing people. And yeah, hopefully you learned something today. That was the 10th point, so we don't got no more. And hopefully you don't go through the same issues that I spoke of today and you create a very innovative agave company. And I wish all of you luck, my friend. And I that's why I put a lot of this content out because I want to see agave revolutionize the world, and I think it could do it. You know, so let's go out there and do it. And yeah, catch you on the next podcast. Um, what you call it? Hopefully this one comes out before Christmas or whatever. But I got a lot of recorded podcasts that I'm going to be uploading in the next few days, so we'll see how they get arranged or whatever. But this was a fun one to record for y'all. If y'all got any podcast ideas or stuff you would like to hear me talk about, let me know. I'm not a super genius or whatever, but even if you ask me about something I don't know, because I'm a historian, I pay a lot of access to different databases and stuff, and so I can read peer-reviewed articles and shit. That's something I learned in college, you know. Like in college, you would have access to all these different databases because you pay 50 grand tuition, so they the school paid access and they just give you the password, you know. So then when I got out of college, I was pissed because I'm like, I lost access to all these databases, so I just started paying for them on myself. But it's great because I mean, one database in particular has like tens of thousands of articles on agave and research. And point is, that's how I learned more. Like the other day, somebody was asking me about, not the other day, but probably like 6 months back, they were asking me about agave fiber. And then I had read a couple articles on it. But because it got me interested in the topic again, I went to go read some more articles on it. And then I was seeing all this cool new research about it being used in insulation. And I was like, oh, that's fucking dope. I need to apply this to make a business product here in America, you know? But point being, I relayed that info back to the homie who asked me about it and sent him the research paper. And I just screenshotted a bunch of the crucial points to it in case he didn't want to pay for the access or whatever. Because you could pay for the whole database access, which is like it's expensive sometimes to these databases, but you could pay per article too. It's like a couple bucks to just read it. But if you read a lot like me, then it doesn't make sense because you're gonna pay way more than the monthly subscription or whatever. But point being, go out there and read research and send me whatever the questions you want on research because it usually do the research myself and then learn and relay that back to you. So mention that because even if I don't know the answer to the question, I'll find the answer. That's what a good historian does. Um, Historians know how to find and absorb a large quantity of information very quickly and understand it. We do the who, what, where, and why to every single piece of documentation, because it all matters. If a bioenergy company is sponsoring, you know, research on energy production in agave, you got to take that shit with a grain of salt. They might be skewing the numbers a little bit to try to get a deal. You get me? If a big agave company is putting out research on environmental impact, you got to take that with a grain of salt. Obviously, they're going to want themselves to look good, right? Look at the when. It's like Howard Scott Gentry wrote a lot of really good information on agave, but it's more than 60 years old, and it's like some of it's outdated. You know, so take it all with a grain of salt, my friends. No matter how good the researcher is or where the research is coming from, everybody has a fucking purpose in what they're doing. And I'll tell you straight up, my purpose is just to make you a better agave farmer and cactus farmer. I want the small agave farmers to stop disappearing. I want them to make a resurgence. I want them to revolutionize the world by having all types of very niche farms that allow for their sustainability, allow for the economic prosperity, and all that, man. So I want you guys to just succeed better. I mean, I'm fine already. Don't worry about me. What I want is just agave farmers to proliferate. And the ones I'm seeing proliferate, they are not the best people. So the only way I see right now to get more people into agave is talking agave with you, showing you the good, the bad, the ugly, and you make the decision for yourself what you want to do. I'm not gonna push anybody to do anything in agave. I'm just gonna show you as much as I can, and you figure out whatever the fuck you want to do. All right, then. I'll catch y'all later, because the goats, they're looking at me like, what the fuck, Steve? Let me out already. I let them out in the morning, and then I came to record this, and it's been like an hour and a half, so I'm gonna let them out right now. They're on break. Get them some alfalfa so they don't scream at me too much. But yeah, I'll catch everyone later, and have a great rest of the day. I'll put this podcast out today, and yeah, catch everyone. Have a great rest of the day, weekend. Happy or happy holidays, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate. You know, we love all religions on the podcast, so go celebrate whatever you want with your family and have fun. Love all y'all. Peace out.